want to thank everybody for tuning in to our webinar this evening. We appreciate your time this afternoon. And this is, and I'm Jeff Futch. I am the Regional Supervisor for the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources Western Office here in Asheville. And I will put a link to our building so you can look at that at your leisure in the chat, kind of see what we're all about if you have not heard of us before. And then can get in touch with myself. I've got contact information on there later if you have questions about anything you might see regarding our office and programs we offer and that type of thing. This evening is actually the 5th in a series of 5 webinars that we have done that our office has hosted during the months of February and March. And all of those programs, if you've noticed in the chat, all of those programs are available by recording, and this one will be as well on the our department's YouTube channel. And a link to that has been provided in the chat box that you might want to check out later and see all of those. But we've had the pleasure of having some really good programs. Dr. Ron Nash from ETSU has done 2 programs for us. Just to mention a few, so I would certainly encourage you to check that out, see if there's something else you would like to watch. As far as logistics this evening, we encourage folks to use the Q&A box if you have questions. I'll be monitoring that box to see if things pop up, and if there's something. I guess I could ask Ashley and Dr. Pierce this, if they'd like for me to, if they have a moment when they ask if there's any questions or might like to ask me, I can let them know, or we can certainly wait towards the end. We will be kind of transitioning, I guess, from one to the other, and that might be a time to take a quick look at the Q&A box just to see if anything's going on there. But would certainly encourage folks to use the Q&A and put their questions in there. Our hope is to be able to get to all and any questions that come up this evening before we're done around 8 o'clock. So I'd encourage you to do that. Let's see, I think as far as logistics and stuff, that's probably about it at this point. So you all folks tuned in not to hear me, but to hear them. So let's go ahead and get folks introduced and get this thing moving along. Tonight, we're going to be hearing about the Railroad and Incarcerated Laborer Project and some about the history of the Western North Carolina Railroad from Dr. Dan Pierce and from Ashley McGee Waddle. And I think I've said that right. Did I say the last name right?
It's Whittle.
Whittle. I always get stuff backwards. Ashley McGee Whittle. Dr. Pierce, many of you know both of them, probably folks that are tuning in, but certainly if not, Dr. Dan Pierce is UNCA Interdisciplinary Distinguished Professor of Mountain South at UNC Asheville in the History Department there, and is a Western North Carolina native. He received his BS in Education from Western Carolina University, his MA in History from the University of Alabama, and PhD from History Department at University of Tennessee. And most importantly for tonight, is a founding member of this rail project that we are going to hear more information about. He resides there in Ridgecrest, and I won't steal any of his thunder. He can tell you all about all of his connections and interest in this topic. Ashley received her BA in history from UNCA. We got a UNCA theme going here, which is fine. I'm a UNCA grad too, so I'm good with that. She worked at the Archives and Museum Services program at Biltmore House for a while before returning to UNCA, where she's currently employed as an assistant archivist at Ramsey Library in the Special Collections Department there at Ramsey. And she's currently pursuing her master's in Library and Information Services from UNC Greensboro. And if I didn't mention it, she is also a WNC, Western North Carolina native. So with that, I will turn it over to, I guess, whoever's going to go first. I guess that would be, is that going to be Ashley? Hands pointing somewhere, so I'm assuming it's you, Ashley.
He's pointing to me.
So I'll turn it over to you. You go right ahead.
That's fine. I figured that he was going to introduce us again, but the introduction that you gave, Jeff, was great. That was wonderful. So again, for anybody that missed it the first time, my name's Ashley McGee Whittle. I'm the assistant archivist here at Ramsey Library Special Collections. I want to apologize first off. I know my image is really dark on here. I have a 1-year-old that's being put to bed right now, and we're in a very small rental house while we build our retirement home in Fairview. So I'm actually relegated to my front porch right now while my husband's putting her to bed. So I apologize if you hear any ambient noise or you can't see me really well. I'm really sorry about that. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. All right. So I did graduate from UNC Asheville under historian professor and local hillbilly Dr. Daniel Pierce's mentorship. He approached me about this project a few months back. The impetus behind this project was basically the construction of the Mountain Division of the Western North Carolina Railroad is widely considered to be one of the greatest human accomplishments in regards to both engineering and construction ever undertaken in the time it occurred in the late 1800s. It took place over a period of several years at that time, and many people who are local and many people who are not local are aware that the railroad provided the first dependable access to and from much of Western North Carolina for the rest of the state, as well as a lot of the nation. Many also know a lot of the names that were instrumental in seeing through the completion of this project. Colonel Alexander Boyd Andrews of Andrews Geysers fame. Most people are unaware, though, that at least 95% of the labor which built the railroad across the Blue Ridge Escarpment was completed by inmates that came from the North Carolina State Penitentiary. And about 98% of those inmates were African American men. And the majority of those African American men were unjustly imprisoned during this time. So the rail project was created to share in the real story behind this marvelous human endeavor, and to also honor their memory with monuments and wayside markers. And we are hoping to uncover another frame in this hidden history of Appalachia, because we know that the area is very rich in heritage, but it's also very rich in diversity. And we want to memorialize all those who have lost their lives in undertaking this project across the mountain. I have a personal interest in this project. I'm an Old Fort native. I'm actually living in a rental house here in Old Fort right now. I also come from a railroad family. My grandfather, Paul Brigman, worked for more than 30 years for Norfolk Southern as a conductor. The picture here on the slide that you see, the initial picture here, that was him. That's him on a caboose. And Dr. Pierce always wants me to tell people why I'm personally interested in this project, not just because I come from a railroad family, but there's other reasons too. I'm a historian, I'm an archivist. My job is to help people locate sources for what they're searching for, but my job is also to evaluate the sources that I give to people to make sure that they're credible and accurate. And historians and archivists do this because we work to identify and connect historical events, true history, the truth. And for too long now, a lot of this area has been both stereotyped and whitewashed. And it's really long past time to start uncovering and sharing the true history of this area. And you know, the history that is associated with this area isn't always pretty, but that's just what history is, the good and the bad. So by bringing these stories to you, the public, we are hoping to continue this journey towards social justice for Appalachia's disenfranchised minorities. And we want to bring these histories and untold stories to life. And let's talk about some railroad history now. So when people talk about the history of the railroad in Western North Carolina, the first thing they think about is how The railroad came from down east and came into the mountains, and it opened this backward mountain region to the outside world. But Western North Carolina was not isolated prior to the coming of the railroad. By the end of the Civil War, and with the coming of the railroad too, all the way from Ducktown, Tennessee, east to the Low Country, Western North Carolina really became world renowned as a resource of raw materials. The railroad just provided a way to get these materials a little bit easier to a global economy. But one thing that people are not aware of today is that when we talk about the railroad coming into Western North Carolina, it's that convict labor is what is responsible for the completion of what was once known as the Western North Carolina Railroad that goes between Salisbury and Murphy. So the precedence for African American convict labor was laid before the Civil War even started. By 1862, railroad promoters had realized that there was a real shortage of labor, and it was delaying completion of the Western North Carolina Railroad. So William H. Thomas of the Cherokee Nation and Augustus S. Merriman from Asheville wrote to Governor Vance, and they asked him if he would send slaves from the eastern part of the state up here to the western part of the state to start laboring on the railroad. So Governor Vance agreed, and contracts were drawn up with slave owners. Wages varied based on unskilled labor of slaves versus skilled labor of slaves. But unfortunately, or maybe not unfortunately, the number of slaves that were available to work on the railroad was based upon that particular year's agriculture. And in 1860, the year turned out to be a banner year for farming, so there was still a scarcity of labor in the form of slave labor this time available to work on the railroad. And then by 1864, the South was really mired up in the Civil War. Military action had arrived on the Western North Carolina Railroad by June. General Stoneman of Stoneman's Raid notoriety, he destroyed much of the railroad on his march to Tennessee. He would use it, and then they would destroy it. So by 1868, a bond issue was passed for new construction to extend the railroad from Morganton across the Blue Ridge and into Asheville. And native North Carolinian George Swepson and New Yorker Milton S. Littlefield secured control of the Western North Carolina Railroad through bonds. Unfortunately, these two guys were crooks, and they were concerned with what they were lining their own pockets with. So they ended up with about 97% of the total stock shares in the railroad at that time. A commission was formed to investigate. It's called the Woodfin Commission, and it was chaired by Nicholas W. Woodfin of Asheville. But when the two men received word that they were about to be held accountable for their actions, they ended up skipping town on a train with no lights and $4 million worth of looted bonds. So that delayed the railroad yet again. After this scandal involving Swepson and what Littlefield was known as the Prince of the Carpetbaggers, a new railroad commission was appointed, and the railroad was actually sold to Augustus Merriman, who acted as the state's agent at the time. The new commissioners appointed James W. Wilson, who was a former math teacher at the state university, and he was also a Confederate veteran, and they named him chief engineer. He was tasked with routing the railroad from Old Fort and into Black Mountain and Ridgecrest up and over the Blue Ridge Escarpment. So during this time, the Civil War had ended, and the state they were back to using convicts for work in both the public and the private sector. It had become really practical and really lucrative. The convict labor system in the South was known as slavery by another name, because new laws made it really easy just to pick up any Black person. Excuse me, I'm sorry for the background noise. So the convict labor in the South, it made it really easy. These new laws made it easy just to pick up any Black person along the road and put them into prison. There were just outrageous laws, pig laws, which made the theft of any farm animal worth $1 punishable by 5 years in jail, and vagrancy statutes, which made it a crime not to have a job or to be able to show proof of employment. So, not surprisingly, during this time after the Civil War, when all of these African Americans had been freed, but they had been slaves and that they had no idea what to do or where to go or how to make a living, it was really easy to imprison these people. And at this time, 7/8 of the convicts in North Carolina were African American. So, also at this time, Old Fort was the western terminus of the Western North Carolina Railroad until 1876. There was one train a day that came each way. Passengers headed further west from Old Fort were met by a man named Jack Pence, and he had a stagecoach that was pulled by 6 white horses, and they were conveyed over the crest of the Blue Ridge and into Asheville. But by 1877, James Wilson had been given a contract to start completing both the Swannanoa and Bergen tunnels, and the majority of this work was done by convict labor. He did face a real conundrum, though, because there were poor weather conditions, there was heavy growth of underbrush from non-use of the tracks during the Civil War. A previous laid tunnel had caved in during a landslide. It had wiped out any signs of human labor. It actually almost took a year to find a passable solution in that particular area, and that particular area is now known as Mudcut. So the major hardship of working on this railroad, though, was the actual construction of the track itself. So the ascent from Old Fort into Ridgecrest was over 1,100 vertical feet, and you had to get that 1,100 vertical feet in roughly 3 miles. So in order to overcome that obstacle, a twisting, curving line of track was employed, and you can see on the map here on the right, it loops back on itself in order to obtain the required grade of about 2 feet per every 100 feet. So that meant that around 786 vertical feet were overcome in about 7.5 miles of track. The total curvature of the track is about 2,700 degrees, or about 8 complete circles. And it was built that way in order to negotiate the rise from the gradient on the mountain. They also had to cut 6 tunnels. The Swannanoa is the longest at 1,832 feet, and then there's Lick Log, High Ridge, Bergen, Jarrett's, and McElroy is the smallest at 77 feet. So to put all of this in perspective, if you're from this area, you're probably aware of the drive on I-40 from Old Fort up over the mountain into Black Mountain. But if you're not, putting all this in perspective, the actual point-to-point distance up the escarpment is only about 3 miles, but it took about 8 miles of track to actually do that. So the biggest obstacle to completion during this time was the Swannanoa Tunnel. It was the longest. It was particularly daunting. Wilson actually had to have his crews bore from both sides of the gap simultaneously. They sent a small Norris-built 440 locomotive named the Salisbury to help with the task. They actually brought it up to the mountain by 10 oxen and a crew of 300 convicts who were hitched to the Salisbury and driven like mules up and over the gap with it. A section of track would be laid, the Salisbury would be advanced, then the section of track would be pulled up and relayed at the front end of the locomotive. And then on the other side, the train was slid down with a skid, and the Salisbury helped bring in laborers and supplies to the work site. So it was really instrumental in helping with this project. So convicts first started being shipped around October of 1876 to what is called Henry Station. It's about 2 miles west of Old Fort. If you leave Old Fort and going up Old 70, it's right there where the picnic grounds are. It's right across from where the picnic grounds are. Reports suggested that around 300 male and 16 female convicts were employed at this time. The cash value of their work was measured at about $51,000, or around 98 cents per day per worker. They built the Round Knob Stockade near Andrews Geyser. North Carolina had actually built a state pen in 1870, and an average of 65% of its prison labor was taken out of the North Carolina state pen and moved up here for the construction of the Western North Carolina Railroad. Contract stipulated that convicts would labor around 10 hours a day. No white person was held liable for the escape or the mistreatment of any convict. These prisoners, they endured terrible working and living conditions. They lived in railroad cars, which had been converted into basically jailhouses on wheels. They even included iron rings inside these cars to latch convicts' chains to the sides of the cars. So they were really horrendous conditions. By 1877, which was just 1 year later, initial reports stated that 430 convicts had worked about 7,700 days a month. Out of that set of convicts, 42 had escaped, 30 had died, 4 were killed, and roughly 99 were discharged or pardoned. They did work sun up to sundown. They were kept in various stockades between Henry Station and all the way over to Swannanoa. Building the tunnels, that was the real crux of the project. It was extremely dangerous. Since the end of the Civil War, black powder had become really scarce in the South. So to solve this issue of excavating solid granite, which is what they had to do to build these tunnels, they would take huge pyres of pine logs, which they had cut down by hand, and they would stack them and they'd burn them down to hot coals. And then they would pour cold water onto the rocks where those hot coals were, and that contraction would split the rock for the tunnel construction. They also used nitroglycerin. They would mix it with sawdust and cornmeal and tamp it down into a drill hole. Obviously, these African American convicts were not trained to handle these kinds of explosives. Many died. Many were buried in countless unmarked graves right alongside the track. So by late 1877, almost all convicts were being transferred up from the state pen to Western North Carolina. The climate around here was really difficult. It made disease a daily part of camp life. Any Superior Court judge could order convicts to work up here. Once the line was met at Asheville, convicts were not let go. They were then sent to finish lines over at Paint Rock or Murphy. So by spring of 1879, Wilson was getting real close to the completion of this project and finishing the largest tunnel, the Swannanoa. Multiple cave-ins on the Swannanoa and deaths were normal occurrences. The two crews on opposite ends of the Swannanoa finally met on May 11th, 1879. And Wilson wired Governor Vance that day, and he told him daylight entered Buncombe County today through the Swannanoa Tunnel. So the news was obviously received really well by locals, railroad representatives, prominent citizens. Unfortunately, right after Wilson's victory telegram, another cave-in occurred, and it crushed 20 more convicts to death. In all total, estimates say that over 3,000 convict laborers worked on this project. Initially, when we started on this, initial reports suggested that between 125 and 300 convicts died during the construction of this, but we believe that to be way higher. And besides that, the actual cost of human life, we'll probably never be able to quantify it. The memory of those who gave up their blood, sweat, and lives on the completion of this monumental undertaking, though, needs to be remembered, and that's what we're trying to do. One more thing before I do turn this over to Dan. So if you've been up here before, there's a marker that's right there at the entrance to where you go up to the Old Fort Picnic Grounds on the corner there where Henry Station is, where you make that right-hand turn. And Colonel Alexander Boyd Andrews' name is on that. And his name also ended up on the geyser, which lies right alongside the tracks on Mills Creek. So he was a railroad executive, and he was a construction engineer. And he assumed control of the Western North Carolina Railroad as president in 1880. He did complete the line west of Asheville in 1880, and by 1891, he had ensured that the line reached the original goal of Ducktown, Tennessee. He also owned a half interest in the Round Knob Hotel, which the remnants of that, the leftovers of that, is still up there beside Andrews Geyser. I do find it really interesting, though, that so many people believe that he was the man responsible for the construction of the railroad up Old Fort Mountain. but he was really only a small part of what was really a much larger, much more complicated history. So where are we now? So we have a website. We've built a website. We have a Facebook page. If you're not following it and you haven't looked at it, we would love for you to check out both of them. One of our big projects that we've recently done is started working with human remains dogs to locate possible, probable grave sites along the tracks. Dan will talk more about that. We've been able to put our first marker in at the geyser. We're working on more wayside markers now. We also have Kat Warren. She is a retired professor, retired journalist. She wrote this great book called What the Dog Knows. And Ann Chesky-Smith, who's the executive director of the Western North Carolina Historical Association, and myself, but not really, it's really the two of them, are working on identifying possible ancestors of the men and women who worked on the construction of the railroad. Like I said, I really have to put a plug in here for Kat and Ann, because they're really doing a lot of the work right now. My 1-year-old just consumes my life and building a house and everything. So you get the idea there. But they are doing some real great detective work in order to locate these people's ancestors. And it's important that we do, if there are ancestors out there, because they need to be consulted in any work that we do from this point on. Markers, historical trails, anything. We want to involve not only them, but all of the surrounding communities in this endeavor. But most definitely them, if we can find them. And I've probably rambled enough, and you really came here to hear the master talk, so I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
All right, thank you, Ashley. And one of the great pleasures of my life has been the opportunity to work with former students, and I couldn't be prouder of Ashley and all that she's done. And she mentioned that we did have a website and a Facebook page, but Ashley is our webmaster and Facebook page master for that. So I'm just forever indebted to her. And again, it's just been one of the great pleasures of my life. So
I love it in your family.
And it's been a joy to watch her become a mother, and to watch Brenna grow up. So that's been fun on Zoom. Anyway, I want to talk a little about how this project came to be, and what we've done and what we're hoping to do. I'll share my screen here. And let's see. Go to here. So anyway, I live at Ridgecrest, right at the top of the escarpment, and I've lived here about 6 years, but my history with this place goes back really to the late 1950s. I know I don't look like I could possibly be that old, but it goes back to the late 1950s when I'm actually not technically a native of Western North Carolina. I moved here when I was 3, but we started coming to Ridgecrest as a family about 1959, and then I've had a long connection with there as a camper at Camp Ridgecrest for Boys, coming to summer events at the Ridgecrest Conference Center, working as a staffer at Camp Ridgecrest for Boys, marrying a staffer from Camp Crestridge for Girls, our children going to those camps, and then and being staffers at those camps, and then moving up here. So along the way there, I spent a lot of time kind of up and down the trails and roads of this area, and a lot of contact with the railroad. when my wife and I bought a house up here 6 years ago, we spend a lot of time out walking, and often go down to the Point Lookout Trail, which runs along the tracks. We've done several times the hike along what's called the old Stagecoach Road up Mount Kitsuma, and anyway, all in this area. And whenever I was around the tracks as a historian of Western North Carolina, I was always reminded of the history. And I first learned this history in a couple of ways. I think probably the first encounter of really knowing how the railroad was built was reading Wilma Dykeman's book, The French Broad. And she has a chapter in there about Wilson and about the construction of the railroad, and really goes into the details on the use of incarcerated laborers on this project. And then I came across John Ely's book, The Road, which I highly recommend. John Ely was a West Asheville boy like me, but became a well-known writer. Several of his books were made into movies, and I've just always wondered why The Road never was, because it really would make a good one. And Ely does stretch things a little bit, but you do get the flavor of what this must have been like for the people building this railroad, and the incredibly brutal conditions that they faced. Well, again, I'd been here about 6 years, or really less, I guess, when the spring of 2020 and early summer of 2020, and many of you may remember that we were in the beginning stages of COVID. University had shut down in-person classes. We were doing Zoom classes, and I was doing a summer school class that summer. And in the midst of all this, of course, you had the George Floyd murder, and then the resulting protest over that, and real concerns about racial justice at that time. And like a lot of people, I was I think moved by that, and you often ask yourself the question, what can I do in a situation like this? And I'm often, sometimes when that comes to me, I think about the book of Exodus, and I think about Moses. And one of the things that, because sometimes we get frustrated, when we think, what can I do? I'm a long ways from this, does my voice mean anything? Is there anything that can make a difference that I can do? And there are two things that I think are important in terms of that. And that's one, look at your doorstep. And then back to my Moses story here. When in the book of Exodus, if you're familiar with that, when God called Moses to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, Moses, pled that he was not equipped to do that. And then God asked him the question. He says, "What's that in your hand?" And he had a staff in his hand. And if you read the story of the Exodus, then you see the role that staff played in so much of Moses' life and work in leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. And so I've often thought about that in terms of looking at what I can do, not as a way to try to do something that I'm ill-equipped to do, but to try to find something that I am equipped to do. And so I was looking, thinking about this in terms of what's local and what might I be equipped to do. What skills do I have? I usually put it this way: I don't really have any. My son is very, very handy, and I always say that he's the one with useful skills. That I don't really have any. But anyway, I started thinking about that in the midst of this, and I thought, And again, being up and down those tracks so many times, I thought, and I thought about this for a while, that there needed to be some sort of memorial. The only mention of the laborers on this is on a state historical marker with one simple line that, about the Swannanoa Tunnel. It just says built with convict labor. And that's it. And so I thought there needs to be something done. So I called up the man on the left here is named Steve Little. He's a lawyer in Marion, and also the mayor of Marion. He's kind of like, I don't know, small town politics. I think he's mayor for life as long as he wants it, I think. But anyway, I've known Steve for a long, long time. We have a connection through Camp Ridgecrest for Boys. And Steve has been fascinated with the railroad since he was a kid coming to camp, and first went to Andrews Geyser. And then he went to Wake Forest Law School, or actually we went to Wake Forest and did his senior thesis on the railroad, went and found the penitentiary records and all this. And then after he finished law school, he came to Marion and was right there at the railroad and right there at Ridgecrest and the what's called the Swannanoa Grade, or the mountain division of the railroad. And he just kind of made it his life's passion to study and research that. And I knew about his passion for this. So I called Steve up and I said, this was again in the midst of COVID, and I said, come have breakfast with me on my porch. And so on July 7th, 2020, Steve and I met on my front porch and had shared breakfast, but turned out to be about a 3-hour breakfast that day. And by the end of that, we had put together a list of folks that we wanted to contact to see if they wanted to serve on a steering committee that would look into the possibility of building a memorial somewhere to the people that built the railroad. And so it was one of this project has been so unusual in so many ways, but it really began with this. And then on that porch, we got in touch. We ended up there were going to be we're going to contact 9 other folks, including Ashley McGee Whittle and Jeff Futch, among others, several historians, community members from McDowell, and we wanted to have good representation from McDowell County and Buncombe County, and so we contacted all the people on our list, and amazingly, every person on the list agreed to serve on the steering committee. And so we have kept that committee, and then we have recently added a couple of wonderful members. Stephanie Swepson Twitty from Old Fort, community activist there, and Kat Warren is our longest distance member, but since we have Zoomed every committee meeting, that hasn't been a problem. And so it's just been a wonderful group to work with. And people have been so giving in so many ways. And so again, we started in July of 2020. The first thing, one of our committee members was Police Chief Melvin Lytle from Old Fort, who's also another small town story, also a member of the Board of Aldermen. And so one of our first order, we decided early on that Andrews Geyser would be the appropriate place for a memorial because it's a park. There are other memorials there, and it's located on property belonging to the town of Old Fort. And so we, started asking, okay, what do we need to do here? So first thing we know, Melvin says, asked Steve and I, said, can you come to I think it was like August 10th, Board of Aldermen meeting and present a proposal about putting up a memorial at Andrews Geyser. And so we went. Didn't expect things to happen so rapidly. I will say this whole thing has been, I've often characterized it like a Little Rascals episode that none of us really knew what we were doing. It was kind of like, let's put on a show and go out there. And it's been pretty amazing about how things have worked out. But anyway, so we went to the Board of Aldermen meeting. We presented a proposal. We, just asked for space at Andrews Geyser to put up an appropriate stone memorial. We told them that we would pay for it, and they agreed and even voted to give us $1,000 to help along the way as starting money. We also got very early money, a nice donation from the Wilma Dykeman legacy. Jim Stokely, Wilma Dykeman's son, is on our board as well, and that was a really kickoff. And so this really kind of led us to the next challenge of publicizing the program and raising money. And again, it was just amazing how quickly this went. And within, really, by the end of the year, we had raised well over $10,000. We got some great publicity from WLOS, from Spectrum News, from the Mountain Express, and a number of other media outlets. Ashley's website that she put up, was helping us, and we can, and Ann Chesky Smith, who's on our board as well, enabled us to collect funds and move those funds to the Western North Carolina Historical Association. And so again, we started raising money, and again, it happened much quicker than we ever thought it would. And so early in 2021, we contracted with the man on the left, Paul Twitty, and on the right is Jimmy Logan, who was his assistant in the construction, to build a memorial. And it was just a wonderful experience working with them, because both of them took a very strong personal interest in the project. And then we also contracted with a memorial company in McDowell County to order engraved panels, marble panels that would, and there are two sides of this. You can see it's too small to read the text there, but the text was written by Steve Little and approved by the board. On the back of the memorial is a sampling. We wanted to make them large enough where you could read them. If we put every name that we had, they would have been so small they would have been difficult to read. And so, but we do have a sampling of names. And Ann Chesky Smith was able to find these, and is just an incredible researcher, and she was able to find the names listed in the 1880 census of people who were in the Round Knob Stockade. Round Knob Stockade was just up the road from. Steve Little actually found a map that we weren't quite sure of the location, but he found a map in the penitentiary records. And it's just right above Andrews Geyser. So in this area, which made it even more appropriate about where we put the memorial. And so the memorial was completed summer of 2021, late summer, I guess. And again, we were just thrilled with the work that Paul and Jimmy did on it. And then on October 17th, we were able to have a dedication there. You can see in the middle some of our board members there, Rowan Bishop, who is the director at the Mountain Gateway Museum. Ashley with her hand raised in the air, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Darren Waters, who is now, he was at UNCA when all this started, but he is now the state historian. Steve Little, and Chief, what's Chief's last name? He's now the chief of police at UNC Greensboro.
Boyce.
Yes, Eric Boyce, who was the chief of police at UNC Asheville and a native of Marion, but is now at UNC Greensboro. So that's part of our board there. It was actually the first time the whole board was able to get together in person. One of the highlights of the dedication, thanks to Ashley, with her connections to Norfolk Southern Railroad, we and only a few of us knew that. It was really funny because and we only knew that morning that they were going to run a train through during the middle of our dedication ceremony, and that was it was a big surprise. There were only about, I think, three or four of us that knew it was going to happen, and then and Jeff was actually at the podium making acknowledgments. I don't remember exactly what he was doing and talking, and here comes the train, and Jeff was totally shocked by the thing going on. He said, I don't know if anyone knew that was going to happen or not, but Jeff, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
It was, yeah, I'll just say, yeah, nobody remembers what I said, but that's okay. The train came, so it's all good.
But it was really neat, and thanks to Ashley for helping make that happen. It was just really an added touch. And then we the program just turned out. It was a perfect day. The program was wonderful. Jeff Keith and Kevin Kerberg, who have done some wonderful research on the song Swannanoa Tunnel, talked about that song, and then played music of a man named Shorty Love, who recorded that song for a folklorist back in the 1930s at Duke University. And that was a very powerful experience. And then we had a dedication prayer and the singing of Amazing Grace, and just a powerful experience. And so, it was kind of a great moment in my life, and something I'll always remember. And then, unveiling that memorial to, we probably had about 200 people there. We're very pleased with the turnout. But again, a very powerful moment. And I think, most of us kind of thought, well, we've done our work. We had talked about, we had gotten some additional funds. We got a grant from the Community Foundation of Buncombe County to put up some historic panels up at Ridgecrest at the top of the mountain near the Swannanoa Tunnel. And we're going to do that. But we kind of thought, I think at this point, that, okay, we've done a good thing, and we'll maintain this memorial, but that's pretty much it. That did not turn out to be the case, and so, to say the least. And so Ann Chesky Smith, in the aftermath of this, connected to a professor in the geosciences department or at Western Carolina University, a geologist by the name of Blair Tormey. And Blair works with ground penetrating radar. And so we started talking to him about that. And then Blair connected us to individual named Paul Martin, who's a former student of Blair's, who has a business, Martin Archaeology, out of West Tennessee. And Paul, for a number of years, probably more than 20 years, has trained and works with human remains detection dogs. And so we moved into a new phase, really, unexpectedly, we moved into a new phase in trying to positively identify sites. We knew that that stretch of railroad is a mass grave. And we decided that we talked about this, but really didn't know how we might go about doing this until we learned about this, this process of using human remains detection dogs and ground penetrating radar to positively locate burial sites. And so we started talking with them. And then back in February, we got to know Abby on the left and Riley. And that's just been an incredible experience. So in late February, we had a weekend where Paul and Blair came in. We knew because of the map that Steve Little had found, the location of the Round Knob stockade. And Steve wrote letters to people in that area. That's a residential area, and we received permission from one landowner in the area who fortunately owns a good bit of land right there where the stockade was located. And so that was where we began on Friday in terms of Paul taking the dogs in. We really didn't know, and we also had Spectrum News came back to cover it. John Boyle from the Asheville Citizen-Times spent the day with us, and it was just way beyond our expectations. I mean, we talked to Paul and Blair, who'd done this type of work for years, had kind of warned us ahead of time. We may not find anything, and so we started in the front yard of the house and then moved up towards the back. Nothing, and the dog's just sniffing around. And then as the dog got up behind the house, up next to a patch of woods, Abby, the one on the left, who's the experienced dog, slowed and became very deliberate in her movements. And so Kat was standing there, and Kat has a lot of experience in this as well, and has trained HRD dogs herself. And so I asked Kat, I said, does that mean anything? And she says, yes. And so then not long after that, Abby sat. And that is her alert as to the detection of the gases of human remains that are released by the decomposition of human remains. And so just to make, not to go into too much detail, we continued up through that area, and Abby alerted, I don't know, probably, maybe a dozen times in there. And it was just, an incredible experience to confirm this. The next day, we went to a site on the property of the Ridgecrest Conference Center. Steve Little, and this is kind of a really good, the way history works sometimes in strange ways. And actually, I was talking to a colleague just yesterday about, she was talking about some work she's done with the South Asheville Cemetery, and she had a tape measure in her hand. I never thought this would be one of my tools that I'd be using as a historian. And I said, well, I never thought I'd be working with dogs, on this, and ground penetrating radar and things like that as a historian. But the next day, we went to this site. And the reason we went to this site was that about 10 or 12 years ago, Steve Little was talking to a woman in Ridgecrest, and she was interested in the work that he was doing and the book that he had done on the construction of the Western North Carolina Railroad. And just in conversation with her, she lived in Ridgecrest all of her life pretty much. And she made the statement, she said, I know where a convict cemetery is. And Steve just, about fell over, and he said, what? And so she took him to a site again on the Ridgecrest property and showed him there was no indication that she said there at one time there were stones there, but they had been removed. And so it was just on a hunch from this woman who had grown up in the area and had heard from her parents, who probably had heard from someone else along the way about the location of graves here. So we really didn't know, it's just a story that there's nothing behind, but Paul and Abby went into the area with a lot of briars and brush and stuff like that. And she alerted very strongly 3 times in that area. The next day, so, we were just like, what is going on here? This is just crazy, how this is happening. The next day, we weren't going to use the dogs, but we were going to meet several of us at Andrews Geyser and then do some exploring up around where Ashley had mentioned the mud cut area, just to scout to see the possibility of maybe later on doing some search. This is going to be a long process to do this. And so the dog on the right, Riley, is a dog in training, belongs to Derry, who is Paul's assistant. And Derry was down in the lower part of the field at Andrews Geyser, and Derry was throwing the ball for Riley, and they were playing together, and we were just sitting up near the parking lot waiting for someone to get there. And then Derry came back up and talked to Paul for a little bit, and they got Abby out and put put Riley up. And the next thing I know, here comes Paul walking back up the hill, and he tells Blair, he said, get out the ground penetrating radar. Because Riley had alerted to a spot there, and then they had confirmed, and Abby alerted to the same spot. So anyway, we were able to actually get the ground penetrating radar down there and to see what looked like the cuts. What the ground penetrating radar indicates is soil disturbance, and you can and people who have experience, I can look at it and it's a bunch of squiggles, but people like Blair who are experiencing this can detect something that looks like, where a shovel has disturbed the soil and dug a grave. So anyway, it was an exciting weekend, to say the least. And we have pursued, even before this, Cat Warren has put in a grant for us with the National Park Service. We're hoping to bring in additional teams of human remains detection dogs and do and thoroughly research the area. We're currently trying to get permission from Norfolk Southern to search along the railroad tracks. There are several other, we know of a couple of other stockade locations where there are likely to be burial sites there, and we would like to mark or to mark these in on a map at least. We do plan and hope to put up additional memorials where those are appropriate, and where we can gain permission from folks. So that's and then, as Ashley mentioned, Kat and Ann and Paul's wife actually is a genealogist. We're and Ashley are working together to begin looking into possibly finding ancestors of some of these people. We won't know who's buried in these spots. We don't plan to dig, but we do want to properly memorialize these people and their sacrifice. So again, this started out, for one, Steve and I think anticipated at the beginning that this would be a long, drawn out process just to get the memorial done. That has not proven to be the case. People have been very generous to support our work. if you would like to do so, I think we can put that. I think the website is in the chat, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us still, and so Paul has been very generous with us, but his services are not free. And again, we'll be out again this weekend. Paul has come back, and we'll be out this weekend actually doing some confirmation work and additional ground penetrating radar. The folks at Ridgecrest Conference Center have been wonderful. Art Sneed and Daniel Redding have just been so generous. And I was out there today at the Ridgecrest site, and they had a crew out there clearing everything off so that the dogs can get in there easier, and we can get in there with ground penetrating radar. So again, it's an exciting time. It's a very sobering experience. It's been exciting, but again, sobering to think about what these people did, how they hurt, how they sacrificed, and also to think about our responsibility. This was a state project that drove some of these people to their deaths, and others to a life of disability because and of disease and all sorts of problems. So again, we want to, as historians, we understand that progress comes with a cost sometimes, and needless costs in some ways. And so that needs to be recognized so that these types of things don't happen again, but also these people are deserving of being memorialized. So again, I'll stop talking there and turn it back over to Jeff. If folks have questions, they can ask Ashley.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. We've got one question that came up in the chat that came in, which is actually a really good question. That says, was the McDowell County Historical Society contacted for their input on the project? And I can't 100% say no, because I'm not exactly sure who all Steve Little in particular may have spoken with or has contact with, but I think that's, and Dan, you may have a thought or two on that, but I think that's a great point or a great question, and reaching out to that organization in certainly a formal way is something that we should do, the board should do for sure. I'm familiar with some of the folks on that board, and I'm sure they probably would have would have a strong interest in this, and there might even be a couple of folks there that would be interested in contemplating getting more involved by possibly even serving at some point.
Yeah, one of the things that we're doing right now is making connections to community groups, particularly in McDowell County. And so we've connected with a group called People on the Move in Old Fort, and we want community input into what we're doing, particularly in terms of what type of memorials going forward we would do. So we welcome Steve. Steve knows everybody in McDowell County for one thing, but we'd be glad to come talk to any group, and particularly historical groups like the McDowell County Historical Association. So if you I can put my email address in there, or Jeff, if you want to do that, just dpierce@unca.edu, and be happy. We would be thrilled. And of course, Steve Little's worse than me, for talking. So, and Steve always looking for being a lawyer and a politician, he's always looking for an opportunity to talk. So we would love to come to community groups in McDowell and Buncombe County, and actually doing a few things coming up, like Rotary groups and stuff like that. So we're happy to do that, and would love to do that, because we are really looking now to link up with community groups. There's another group we have connected with is the Old Fort Trails Project, and have been able to talk with a number of people related to that really neat project, because some of the trails that will be put in will be running through areas where we believe there are burial sites. So and they're looking to mark all sorts of historical information along their trails. So again, we welcome that type of thing, and look forward to connecting with more community groups.
I'm curious if maybe some folks, and of course, to remind folks, we certainly planned to run to 8 o'clock, and we don't have to do that. There's no problem if we don't, but was just curious, maybe some folks might find this of interest, is as far as from Ashley's standpoint, as far as, doing research. I mean, where did you find the majority of your information and in doing your work? Where did you find some of the best sources, or as far as, archives, I guess you would say, in different locations?
My own special collections. This is shameless plug here. It really is, because we've got a couple of railroad collections there, and we have some good historical information on the railroad, and I pretty much pieced everything together that I put together on the website and for the presentation, all the background stuff from what I found in our special collections. And I also dug into the citations at the ends of those books and found some other ones, but I pretty much got everything that you see on the website and everything I've talked about from Ramsey Library Special Collections.
And a question, thank you, Ashley. A question there came up, or maybe not so much of a question. Would there be, I'll just kind of paraphrase a little bit, would there be an opportunity to connect with the Community Remembrance Project that's being referred to there, and their efforts to basically recognize, memorialize I believe it's 3 lynchings that occurred in Buncombe County. And we actually did have, I mentioned at the beginning of this that this is the 5th webinar that we've done. And one of those involved or included, the speaker was Dr. Joseph Fox, who is very involved, has been very involved with the Buncombe County Remembrance Project. And I guess really the short answer is yes, we have connected up. And we'll be hoping to more with that organization, with that effort. I don't know a lot about it, and maybe shouldn't try to go into too much detail right this minute, but I do certainly believe there's opportunities that we could look to, examples that we could follow, this organization and this effort could follow, in how those individuals were remembered, and replicate that in looking at the African-American laborers, the incarcerated laborers who died on that project. So we definitely will be talking with them more in the future. And I know that Dr. Fox was certainly interested in talking more and talking more in the near future.
Yeah, I will say I've talked to Joseph about this, and also this connects with that Trails Project, because this is a type of thing, this is in their area as well, and so it is definitely something that we are looking at. We've made those connections, and we'll continue to develop it. That's been one of the neatest things, I think. as part of this project are just all the different groups that have kind of come together. And we kind of discovered that, a lot of us were kind of thinking in the same direction. And so, Sharon, thank you for that question. And we'll be looking to make more connections with that commemorative project.
And Ellen's comment here too, Dan, you might want to basically citizens, anything you mentioned, it was a state project, calling attention to the General Assembly to this history. Is you want to say a few words about that?
Steve is very strong, and he makes a great point about this, because this was a state project. This was, a lot of these, some of the treatment, the ill treatment, could be attributed to the people who leased convicts in many cases. This was a state project, so the state was responsible for what happened. And so Steve Little is very much, and I think that's another thing that we want to do. We want to get some acknowledgement from the state, but we'd also like to get some money, particularly to mark some of these sites where we can confirm that some of these burial sites, so that we can appropriately mark them. And so we're currently working with some members of the legislature and some staff members, some of their staff members who have an interest in this, and we're hoping that we'll be able to get their attention, and I think we have, and hopefully that's going to happen. So that is something very important that we're moving towards, and we've even talked about the possibility of making the drive to Raleigh to visit with some folks and have some conversations about this. So Ellen, we'll let you know about when the time to start lobbying and who to lobby. But there's something that we have started in the last couple of months, and we're hoping to get to some people who can push things through pretty quickly there. So we'll see. But as we've talked a lot about this, we're patient. It's taken a long time, for this point to come, and so we're going to be patient and make sure we do this right. So I think Ellen also had a question about the railroad. Norfolk Southern, again, that was an expense. They don't usually run trains on Sundays, and so that was an expense that they took on to run a train through. They also, in the aftermath of that, gave us the Norfolk Southern Foundation gave us a $5,000 donation. And so we're very appreciative of that. Right now, getting permission, Kat's been our point person on getting permission to take the human remains detection dogs and ground penetrating radar onto their property. And it's a large corporation. They have lots of lawyers and lots of and are very cautious about things, but and Kat says in the chat, it's a work in progress. And so we're hopeful, particularly if we can ever get to the point where we can talk to a human being in person, then I think things will we'll start to move there. So, but again, we're very appreciative of Kat's just been wonderful to, even before she was a board member, to take on a lot of these responsibilities and to be our point person in working with Norfolk Southern. So we're hopeful there. And we think that's really important because we're very sure that there are lots of burial sites along the railroad. We don't want to direct people in any way to the railroad. And I know that's a concern, that there's a big safety concern with them, and we respect that, but we would like to be able to document that with the state archaeology office. Jeff has been our point person in working with state archaeology, and we've developed some good contacts with them as well.
Jeff, I'd like to answer that question there about the, I understand there was a majority of Black inmates who worked on the railroad. How are Blacks represented in your project? We have several board members, founding board members, who are African American. The two men, Mr. Twitty and Mr. Logan, who did the memorial there at Andrews Geyser, are African American. I mentioned that Kat Warren and Ann Chesky Smith and myself are starting to work on some genealogy and trying to find some ancestors to these laborers up there. And one of the things that Kat and I have been talking about is possibly doing some community forums here in Old Fort that are going to hopefully reach out to the African American community and see if we can get them to come and give some of their input on what they think about this and what they would like to see done. So we are definitely representing African Americans in this project. Dan, do you think there's anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I'd just say a couple of other things. One, we really are kind of moving into a new phase in terms of really developing community contacts, and Stephanie Swepson Twitty, who's actually Paul's wife, who was a stonemason who did the work on the memorial, is kind of our liaison to the African American community in Old Fort, and so we're going to do some community work there, some community forums, get input from them, and then Ray McCasson, who is our vice chairman of our committee, and the head of the NAACP in McDowell County, and has deep roots there in West Marion, which is the traditional African American section of Marion, and we're working on connecting with community groups there and getting out and doing community forums and this type of thing. So we're very conscious of that, and want this. Joseph Fox, again, we've been working a bit with him, and we'll do more in the future. So we've been very fortunate. We hate to have lost him locally, but Dr. Darren Waters, who is now our state historian in Raleigh, still is a board member. We won't let him go off the board, and he's been a great connection, both to connecting to African American communities, but also to the state and its resources and support. So we are. Thank you for that question, and we have. It's something we've really been very conscious of, and want to make sure that we are, as Ellen said, about descendant voices being so important, and community voices being so important. So we're very we're sensitive to that, and again, having a variety of inputs on this, and particularly voices from the African American community in terms of how we ought to proceed with this, has been important to us.
Well, and I'll say, to just tack on that for a second, I mean, it's been really wonderful to, like Dan said, the idea was the memorial initially, and thought, well, mission accomplished, but not so fast. So many other opportunities started to present themselves, and it's been really wonderful to see the interest in this from various groups. And at the same time, it came as following trends around the country and in our state and around the country and region in regards to African Americans, and recognizing parts of our history that haven't maybe been completely forgotten, but certainly aren't discussed very often. It's been wonderful to benefit from that as far as this organization and this effort to see the interest that's really kind of just come up out of the ground, so to speak, for this. So yeah, there'll be a lot more opportunities to have those conversations with different parts of the African American community and community in general as we move forward on this. And we certainly welcome that in any way, shape, or form that it may come to us. So
let me just mention one other thing related to that. There's some, this thing is just connected with so many things, and they're just kind of things just spinning off in all sorts of directions. But actually, Dr. Waters and I had a long conversation the other night, and he is very busy, but he is in the process of connecting us to the African American Heritage Commission in the state. And Angela, Jeff, what's her?
Thorpe.
Yeah, Angela Thorpe of the African American Heritage Commission, and so we're going to be working with them as well. So again, we hope we're doing a good job, and okay. Yeah, so LH in Salisbury, send me an email and I'll be happy to talk with you about that.
Yeah, there we go. She put in there again. Well, we're just about to the end, so it's probably appropriate to kind of wrap up here. We really appreciate, again, our attendees. You can't have one of these if you don't have attendees. We can get as many panelists as we want, but if there's nobody to talk to, it doesn't make it anywhere near as much fun. So we appreciate you folks joining in. If you have any interest in the recording and aren't maybe still quite sure where that is, Matt has actually put that back into the chat box. And I do want to thank, reminds me of Matt, I do want to thank Matt Zaire, our media production specialist with the department down in, I guess, in the Raleigh area. I'm not sure where people are anymore with teleworking and everything. Sometimes I don't want to assume Raleigh necessarily, but we appreciate his help. He's helped with all of our webinars and has helped things run smoothly. There Matt is, thumbs up, good. We appreciate your help, Matt. Thank you again, Ashley and Dr. Pierce, your time this evening in talking about this project. And we certainly, well, I, for one, being on the board, look forward to continuing and seeing where this goes. And again, any of the panelists or any of the attendees, any questions you have, we've got Dr. Pierce's email in there, and I'm pretty easy to find. Just Google Western Office DNCR, and that link will come up in the first couple, and my address is in there. Anything before
Jeff, I wanted to say real quick too, for folks that are really interested in this, keep an eye on our Facebook page and the website. I try to keep those updated as regularly as I can. I mean, I spend most of my time digging peanut butter out of my hair these days from a 1-year-old, but I try to keep those updated, and we also put a newsletter out. So make sure you take a look at those two things to see what's coming on the horizon and what we've done so far.
Yeah. And actually, if your fingers are faster than mine, put the website in there real quick. And again, there is a donate button there. we always welcome those. And we thought we wouldn't need to be raising any more money, but that's not the way it's turned out. So but we do appreciate our very generous benefactors. John Ager was a major benefactor of our group, the Wilma Dykeman Legacy, Community Foundation, Norfolk Southern, just Little and Larimore attorneys at law in Marion. And Ashley and her husband Ben have paid for our website all along, and just so many things. So again, this has just been an amazing experience. In an era when there's so much anger and frustration and I don't know craziness. It's been very gratifying to see how people have come together on this project, and again, we look forward to more good things going forward. This HRD stuff, human remains detection dogs, has been just amazing. And so, yeah, and if you would like, just send me an email if you'd like to be added to our newsletter list, and I will put you on that list, happily put you on that list. So we don't have a regular schedule of those. I guess whenever the spirit moves, we have a newsletter. So, but we're about due, and actually, I probably will be doing one soon, just to kind of update on the HRD dogs and some other things. So, but thank you so much, folks, for coming out tonight. And Jeff.
Yeah, thank you again, and thanks to all the individual donors too that have clicked in and left money for the program, for the projects. We appreciate that.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you all. I guess we will sign off and look forward to hearing more in all these various ways. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Jeff.
Yep.